Thank you very much for this very kind introduction, Christophe Moore, director of the RCC. It's a real honor and pleasure for me to be here today to present my research to you. It will be about the social life of pathway and more precisely how pathway motivate us to tie with relationships with the environment and with each other in a certain way. This presentation is it's related to a chapter of the book I'm writing here at the RCC, and it is being published in HAU, Journal of Ethnographic Theory, published by Chicago Press. I think it will be soon available. I would like to extend my gratitude to the managing director of the RCC, Ariel Helmich, all the members of this center, and of course my fellow Landhaus peers, with whom I'm spending 4 wonderful months, during which I learned a lot on environmental history, social sciences, but also, above all, maybe academic friendship. I would also like to thank the National Research Fund of Belgium and the Laboratory for Prospective Anthropology for making this research possible in the first place. And I would be remiss not to start by thanking the community of Shimshal and the Shimshal Nature Trust for the very kind welcome and full support during the 13 months of my research. Shimshal e bezurgeve na nechujeve was now janeve, maar pe Shimshal dastru muisek na muriarkert, save mar yoridet, which save your mandir shobosh starem chaf shukriya. And the people I'm talking to, at least trying, live in a valley called Shimshal in northern Pakistan in the Karakoram mountains, and they identify themselves as Wahi, and Wahi are known to be farmers. They farm fields of potatoes, barley, wheat on an area of about 150 hectares, irrigated by water channeled from the glaciers. And they are also herders. They migrate with flocks of sheep, goats, and yaks in a territory, it's quite huge, a territory of about 2,007 square kilometers. So it's, you can see that here in this gray area. You see the village here? And it's connected to the pastures here all around by pathway, mountainside pathway, but also to the main asphalted road here called the Karakoram Highway that connect Kashgar in China to Rawalpindi. So what do these pathway look like? So they look like that. Pathway, in the literature, this concept holds a great heuristic potential because they just do not connect places. They are the ground on which people meet, form relationships, exchange goods and ideas, but also experience the world and form their habitus. This is why pathway appeared as a metaphor for life par excellence in many songs, stories, and poems. As I will try to show, the pathway of Shimshal refer to all of these ideas, but above all demonstrate that they are not simply ephemeral places of transit and passage, but form relational nodes. Indeed, the inhabitants make the construction and repair of this pathway a daily concern. To build and repair the pathway, irrigation channels, mountain refuges, or bridges across the river, the inhabitants mobilize a collection of gifts called namus. And I will come back to this term during all this presentation, namus, which is defined by a codified expression. The family give its resources and the other their workforce. Usually what's happening, the members of a family invite other families of the village to share a meal, during which they announce their intention to build something for the community, a structure, an edifice. The sponsoring family makes food as well as material and financial resources available to the other households. And these households, for their part, mobilize their workforce to physically develop the structure. And what is very important to note now is that the sponsoring family reserves the right to name it, the pathway, the structure, after a loved one. So most of the time an elder or someone who died recently, whose name they wish to preserve. So all this pathway people are walking on are named after deceased, someone they want to cherish, to honor. And it is expected that the people who walk there cross the bridges, rest in mountain huts during their pastoral migration, or use the irrigation channel, will address prayers and wishes to both the person in whose name these structures were built and those who built them. The inhabitants engage in this construction out of personal and family interest, of course, out of moral obligation to the community, out of concern for pleasing God and saving one's soul, and in the name of attachment to the deceased. In this way, this pathway do not only connect places, but bind in places the relationship between the living, the deceased, and God. So why am I showing you this video even before having started my research question? Because it's very important for you to know from where they arose, from which world, sensible and complex world they come from. I fully subscribe to the idea that ethnography is first and foremost a discipline based on an educative approach, an approach that gives nuance and details the heuristic place they deserve. Anthropologists can never be fully certain that they have in fact grasped the meaning of what they hear and what they observe. It is with this humility, I think, that we meet our fieldwork partners in order to better understand the world that we seek to inhabit with them. It is very important for me because to say that, because I think ethnographic fieldwork starts when you recognize that you don't understand what's happening just in front of you, and you start to have to need someone else to explain, to understand what people are doing, how they are thinking, what meanings this practice has. As a result of this attention to detail and nuance, I use local concept as the basis of my, because they will show it. Okay. As a result of this attention to details and nuance, I use local concept as the basis of my analysis, my ethnographic theory, and to dialogue with anthropological and other disciplines concept. Similarly, I try not to use the testimonies of my fieldwork partners to simply illustrate my argument, but rather to bring them into a direct dialogue with the theories I mobilize. Sorry. So first of all, I would give you an overview of my work. And mostly I will say something about what I'm not going to talk to. So the first, I call that an ethnography of pathway. And the first area of this research, of course you guess it, it's about the circulation of gifts. I will come back to this immediately. Mobilized to build and repair this mountainside pathway. Indeed, everyone walks and everyone gives, but by giving in order to walk better and by experiencing the need to give while walking, the Wahi and specifically the Shimshali invite us to think how the circulation of the gift and the circulation of the people shape each other. The second focus of my work, and it was mentioned by Christophe, is the role of walking and road building in the composition of poetry. And also the performance of this poem, how do they contribute to the knowledge of and representation of places? These poems are extremely important for my work, given their aesthetic and poetic, as well as precious archival value for tracing in the construction of infrastructure by locals and of course gift-giving practices. I will try to mention one or two later if we have time. And finally, my work also focuses on how the road built by the state through the Karakoram mountains accelerated social change and how people react to that. So it was very interesting for me, for example, to see that, for example, you have a village somewhere and suddenly it takes time to build a road, right? But suddenly you will have a road to take to reach other villages, valleys, cities. And people will start, for example, stopping going to the pastures and will try another job. And it will destabilize somehow the pastoral migration, how people would react to that. And it was very interesting to see that on the road, people meet and create new ideas, imaginaries. They will embody to recreate the social, political, religious relation to adapt their community to new realities. It's a very huge topic, and I'm not the only one to work on this, but it's I can't, just talk about this here. So I will concentrate on the first point, and I think you are, we are here at the RCC, and I guess you are interested in to study the relation with the environment. So let's focus on the first point. I will first give an example of this logic of how people give between themselves to build a road. We will turn to ethnography for that. I will tell you a little story. And in the second part of the presentation, I will show that the motivation to give are in fact related to how people perceive their environment, built environment, while walking. So, of course, when I, at the first stage of my study, to study this practice, I turned to the famous essay on the gift written by Marcel Mauss on the threefold obligation to give, to receive, and to return a gift. I think it's quite well known here, right? Yeah. I will try to give an overview, so don't hesitate to intervene and correct me if I'm going wrong. I explored two lines of thought of the author. The first one was the most obvious one and the central tenet of this theory, and in fact the reason for its success. It lies in the fact that the gift regenerates relationships between the givers and the receivers. The gift bears the imprint of the giver. Thus, accepting a gift means agreeing to the giver becoming a part of your life, of one's life, at the risk of remaining indebted to the giver if no counter-gift is returned. The debt, therefore, brings the exchanger closer together, but at the same time creates a difference in status between them. And this is why anthropologists were so attracted by this theory, because it helps you to understand both how social relations are generated, but at the same time it explains how hierarchy appears in society. This was the first and most obvious, I think, line of thought of the author. But there is a second one, and it's very, this is my opinion, but it's very interesting to see how anthropologists will mostly focus on the first one and sociologists on the second one. But that's my opinion, of course. While the symbolic nature of the gift explains why the receivers return a gift, gift giving is always at the crossroads of multiple motivation. We can say that there is a reason to give because giving something obliges the receiver to do something for you, right? So giving is always a kind of agonistic sharing. But there is also an obligation, a moral obligation to be generous and a certain interest in being spontaneous or pretend to be spontaneous. So it was very interesting how the author just explored how all this complexity of human being. And first of all, it provided a relevant, I thought, a very relevant analytical framework to study the construction of pathway there. But in fact, my observation didn't, fit in this theory. Not all of them, at least. Why? Because the gifts somehow in this theory were considered, not every time, but in most cases, as something already there. Ready made or ready to be exchanged between one group and another one, or between an individual and another individual. In Namas, it seems a bit different because people would not exchange goods or gift to regenerate reciprocity, relationship, but they would gather them together to build something else. Right? So it was very interesting to see how the thing built, thanks to the circulation of the gift, participate in this circulation. Right? That's the first question. We will come back to this later, but that was the first obstacle, we can say, I had with this theory. The second body of literature I turned to was the anthropology of road, of course. And the very interesting thing here also was to see how researchers develop what Alessandro Ripa and Matthias Rest also called a relational approach, like how road and society impact each other. And in fact, I'm saying that they define it as a relational approach, but in a very critical way, in fact. This is how this approach, for example, and this is a very brilliant and important approach, but it would explain, for example, it would reveal the political agenda of the state, why the state did, build this road there, and road crossing country reveal the geopolitical relation between states, and of course they impact socioeconomically the people. They cross by crossing their territory, they impact them, of course. So this was the relational approach developed by this body of literature. But once again, I had to admit that it was not sufficient for me, because once again, as the gift, the road was considered somehow as already there. You consider the road as an objectified entity somehow, having an impact on people. But what about the relation people tie with the road they made and between them through building? So I know it's a bit tricky. It's a bit that's ethnographic question, but I will come back to that in a very concrete way, just to mention how I position myself in front of this literature. And to answer to that question, I propose to turn now to ethnography. I will try not to be too long, because when you start telling stories in ethnography, you can stay for hours. So I will really do my best. Yeah, okay. Okay, so one of the main area of my inquiry was here in the valley of the Shimshal Valley, called Pamir Tang, and Tang means narrow, as you can see, but also to become nervous, and I let you guess why. So I'm trying now to talk about the story. It starts in the 60s, so of course the landscape has changed, but you can get, I think, quite a good idea of how the landscape was at that time. So what we do as an anthropologist to answer to this question we have here. Most of the time, I was with my fieldwork partners, walking with them on the pathway, taking pictures, and I will show you some soon, and asking them how did it happen. This is always the same question we ask. It seems simple, but in fact it's not, because after that people start telling you story, and you have to compare them and to understand it better. But I took pictures and came back to the village, and I was asking, how did it happen? How did you start building this pathway there? And the person I was asking that is called Daulat Amin. He's a very important head teacher in the village, and he started telling me the story. We are in the 60s, and three hunters, Muhammad Ataullah, Khalifa Shaheen, and Bakhtavar, were trying to hunt ibex, and there were no road at that time in this valley. They wanted to hunt ibex for the family, to bring back food for the winter. And they had to walk on this very difficult pathway, and they lamented on their fate because they were exhausted to find the herds, and they couldn't reach the place where the ibex were. And so in the evening they were lamented on their fate, and they decided to turn back to the village. But one of them, Muhammad Ataullah, the oldest one, decided not to follow the riverbank, as people do usually, but to try to find a way on the mountainside. And he succeeded because he built some cairn, so like some stone together, just to trace a line that could become a pathway one day. And he came back to the village, and then this is when the thing gets a bit more complex. His friends were very enthusiastic. Oh wow, you found a way, we will build something together. But in fact, any family, you can't build a pathway yourself, right? You need the help of the other. But to do so, you have to involve all the other family of the village to help you to organize the gift-giving I was talking about. But to do that, you must motivate them, and you must explain them that they need that too, right? So to do so, you must see the figures of authority of the village, the political and religious representative of the village, to ask them to support your ideas. And why do you need to do so? Because figures of authority embody the imaginary that everyone shares, and they speak in the name of God, who gives values and social norm their legitimacy. Like other Wahi communities in High Asia, the inhabitants of this village are Ismaili. They are structured around their spiritual leader, the Imam of the time, who sets out a specific line of conduct for his followers all around the world, a right path to follow, along which to progress in order to lead a successful personal and collective life, and more generally, to work for the betterment of humankind. The figures of authority of the village thus speak in the name of God, in the name of the spiritual leader, the Imam of the time, and in the name of the collective, and are thus able to legitimate the decision as to which action should be undertaken and which should not. So to put it simply, the type of the building you want to build should match with what the figures of authority consider to be good according to the collective imaginary. And if I may make a small digression here, the fact that giving is shaped by imaginary, and honestly there would be a lot of things to say about this, explain why namus, this gift-giving practice, have been tailored to new realities. For example, at the beginning of the last century, when the village was part of the Hunza Principality, people resorted to namus to build pathway, mountain hut, bridges, irrigation channel to reach the pasture, to irrigate the pasture, to irrigate the field. You can see some of them here. Here you have a road, the current road, the jeepable road, but there you can guess there is another one here, up there. This is an old one. Yeah. This is a picture taken by Reginald Schomburg in 1935, if I'm not wrong. And you can see some evidence of this kind of building like more or less 100 years ago. But more recently, after the deposition of the Prince of Hunza and the fall of the Principality in 74, and on the advice of the Imam of the time, the people started building school to ensure the provision of good education in the village and a road. I'll just show you that. This is the same road I showed you earlier, to connect the village to the main cities of Pakistan. And today, tourists play the role of the sponsor and build schools, as well as healthcare center, bridges and mountain hut, such as the Luidkirkehütte. You can see it here. It's called Luidkirkehütte, after a village in Bavaria called Luidkirch, right? I think it's 2-hour drive from here. Yeah, someone from there helped them to build this mountain hut. So let's say hello to Christian. Okay, so once the figures of authority are convinced, like all the rest of the village, right? The initiators invite all the lineage, the families, the elders, the leaders of the village to share a meal and to present the project, which will be supported by everybody, by the figures of authority, but by the leaders of each and every family. And to sum up, Ataullah and his 2 friends, Khalifa and Bakhtavar, formed the sponsor group, and all the other family, the builders. Both are motivated by the collective interest, but they are also motivated by religious discourse. Their action nurture one soul, the invisible part of the one being. By getting involved in building a pathway for the collective, they take God as a witness and progress on the spiritual pathway. Finally, in nomus, the one who chooses the name of the path to be built is the one who gathers the resources. When they talk about nomus, the sponsor refers to the benefit they receive from the person to be honored. This fully captures the ambivalence of gift-giving. The sponsors seek to give their loved ones a place of remembrance because what they gave them when they were alive. Through the movement of the inhabitant, their names are remembered, their stories told, their souls saved. The eponym turns into a model and the path one walks on, a path to follow, a path a person has traced. In our story, Muhammad Atta was the oldest one, so these two friends allowed him to name the pathway after someone he wanted. And he did that in the name of his mother. So for those who have very good eyes, you can guess some stones here, right? Yeah, some here. This is the remaining of this path, built in the 60s. And 5 years later, one of the young hunter, Khalifa, the father of the storyteller, died, and his family was in a deep sorrow. So Ataullah met his family, and they decided to build another path that would connect to this path called Bibihan. And the path I'm talking about, is this one called Shahin, Khalifa Shahin Parien. Parien means the pathway. And the family of the deceased and Ataullah family pulled their resources to do so. In 82, so the story continues. It's very long, so I'm trying to make it short. The storyteller decided to improve it in 82. And 3 years later, he built another path in the name of his mother and the pathway of his mother. The wife of Khalifa Shahin, Zinul, is here. And the 3 sons of Ataullah, the oldest hunter, decided also to build a new path, right, in 98, and it's here, somewhere here. And it's called Muhammad Ataullah pathway. And that I'm just taking some time now, in just a minute. It's very interesting now because there are songs, of course, on Muhammad Ataullah actions, and it helps you to understand who was this person, and of course you can understand how these people were moved by the pathway they built and walk on to compose this poetry. But that's another story for maybe one day, I don't know. So we are going slowly to the last section, as I hope we still have time. So to sum up, and I like to sum up because you won't have any conclusion, so I like to make step-by-step conclusion, progressing on the pathway somehow. So to sum up, nomus, like other gifts, generate multiple relationships between the living, the deceased, and the deities, such as God, and do not escape the fundamental theorization of the gift as the fundamental act underpinning social ties and structures. However, this is the point, the sponsors are indebted, indeed, to the eponym. But the distinction between the sponsors and the builder as either givers and receivers does not hold. Both of them consider themselves as participants, and if their contributions differ, this is due to the fact that only the sponsor has the right to name the structure after a loved one. I can't come back, I can explain that very precisely. You have to believe me. If you want to have more detail, just read the article. It's very long because you have to analyze who give what to who, for which reason, when. It's very long, so I need just 1 hour just for that. So just feel free to go to the article and to criticize this later. Moreover, and this is maybe the most obvious one, so I should concentrate on that. The aim of nomus is not to generate reciprocity only. It is, but not only. It is also, and above all, to build something for the collective. And this collective infrastructure belongs to everybody, and that's the key point. This means that it won't indebt the worker who will use it, right? And this ethnographic reality nuances the role of the debt as the main driver motivating people to give, and calls for exploring more deeply the reason to give. I just highlight them here. So the interest of the family, the interest of the collective, but also moral obligation, the need to progress on the spiritual pathway, and also the love for the eponym. These are the motivation. We need to explore more. And indeed, whereas the Maussian approach explains reciprocity through the circulation of things, nomists show how the making of collective things enables people to circulate. And this ethnographic reality resituates the reason to give in inhabitants' journey through the built environment. And here is, for example, what someone would say, he is old now. He is the son of a shepherdess called Durik. And this is the pathway of Durik you can see here. It's a very long one, so after here it becomes a bit more dangerous. But this is the pathway of Durik. And what the people would always situate or locate the motivation in place. That was very important for them, very interesting for me. When I walk on this path, the path of his mother, I am grateful to God for accepting the food given for my mom's path. It was translated by a friend, so this is why it's a bit, isn't exactly that. But he said that when my father walked on this path, he was very grateful. Right? And this is, of course, the necessity to both to give something for the loved one, but also a moral obligation. You feel that in place by walking. Shain Karim, the head teacher of the village now, showed that walking makes for a certain way of thinking about giving. What he said that when I go there, I imagine how the nomus helped when there were no institution, no government. People use this tool to solve their problems. And then I think about the future. How can we make things easier and more accessible for people? This year, especially in each place, I thought, will York will be able to get through here or not? Which path should be repaired or extended? It was too fearing, he said. Looking to the past, I thought it was a wonderful system, that it was very good, but then also what path should be repaired. And I found in the third comment of a fieldwork partner, can I say that the notion by which I could conceptualize that. This person is one of the grandchildren of Durik as well. That's why I put the same picture. He said nomis are a kind of motivation for others. It's a kind of motivation to make nomis. There are two things. First, it gives people comfort. Second, it gives the name of a person. My grandmother has passed away, but the road over there is practicable. So people remember, and when they go there, they pray for her. Amanullah speaks about the circulation of the gift, so dear to Marcel Mauss, so articulated with the relationship that forms between a built place and the person who uses it. The appropriateness of the path on which one walks motivates those who use it to pray and to make nomis in turn. Appropriateness relates to the affordance, the concept of affordance of Gibson, through which humans know the environment in which they live through perception in their practical activity. It is, in this sense, knowledge is relational because what the perceivers perceive is what the thing affords, according to the action they take. And what is perceived shapes the action in return. Affordances are of major interest for the study of generation of social life, as Alessandro Ripa and Matthäus Rest show, because the author adds two very important points. First, humans have the ability to alter these affordances and to perceive other human according to these affordances. And it was very interesting for me to use it because, and especially in the Ingoldian way, according to who we act, according to what we undergo while walking in an ever-changing environment. So I tried to apply this concept to understand from where and when the motivation to give were generated. And you always face such kind of episode in the village. And I was very interested to see how the way people take the stone and smash the rock was a kind of also the circulation of the stone. they are together, and how the circulation of the gift is like a rhythmic response to the movement of the environment, the vagaries of the environment, in a very pre-objective way, in a very phenomenological way. There would be also a lot to say about this, how people would react. If you do that well, they will shout and praise you, and it's also related to social recognition. And it is also how we can say that people are growing up and forming habitus while walking, but that's another topic again. But something, in fact, was not enough for me with this approach, because people would react with a certain regularity, and the environment would tell them somehow the same motivation all the time, the same reason to act. So we needed to take into account the symbolic dimension of the landscape, and this is exactly what I think Amanullah does. He gives the comment I showed you before. He gives an equal importance to both walking and the symbolic dimension of nomus. His considerations are shared with Augustin Berck, a geographer, for whom humans and the environment co-suscitate one another. His work shows that society perceives the environment as a function of the way in which they shape it, while they arrange it as a function of the way in which they perceive it. For him, humans alter, they change, they modify the affordances of their environment. They do not inhabit the environment, but a domesticated one, what he calls a milieu. Altered human affordances are like architectural motifs. These motifs bear the imprint of human action and are therefore directly symbolically, significant for those who will perceive them. These motifs give them reason to act, that is motivation. And what I really like with this approach is that you don't need to just pretend that people embody symbolic structure or symbolic world and apply it to the rest of the landscape or the environment of the world. But in fact, you cannot think if you are not in place. I mean, or to put it in another way, you cannot think specifically to something if you are not in this place, because this place somehow gathers knowledge. In this approach, and that will be the last paragraph, human and their environment are not separated, but coexist in an ontological relation, which is always ecological, technical, and symbolic. Humans exist, act, and think through their built and shared environment. In this context, I argue, the reason to give are not anything but the motivation to act, as felt by the walkers walking on their collective infrastructure. The reason to give are not so much the drivers of human action in general, and of the exchange of things between people in particular, but motivation generated by the human-built environment. The reason to give, as well as the logic of the gift, are concretely experienced by the inhabitants, for whom the affordances of the infrastructures constitute motives to walk in a certain direction, but also to give in a certain way. As motivation do not exist separately from the experience of the built environment, the circulation of the gift is anchored in the experience of walking on the infrastructure. And that's it then. Thank you so much for your kind attention.